Thanks for having us today. We're thrilled to be presenting at the SANS OSINT Summit. I watched all of last year's. I think the year prior I might have caught part of it. It's excellent every year. All the presentations up till now have been great. I expect the rest of the day to go perfect. Our talk today is Once Upon a Crime, a novel approach to OSINT through storytelling, by me, Rae Baker, Tracy, Maleeff, and I don't know if you can see my other co-host, Nicholas Cage there. All right. The focus today will be on report writing. I think in OSINT we put a lot of emphasis on searching for the content, the data, and making an intelligence. But if you are not able to effectively relay all that information that you find and tailor it to the end consumer, it doesn't really mean much. So we're going to both share some cases and hopefully illustrate how telling the story through reporting led to better results in our cases. So the following are all true stories, except for the ones that are not. And my name is Rae Baker, and you can find me on Twitter at Wondersmith_Rae. I have worked as a senior cyber recon analyst for about 2 years now. I've been in OSINT for about 3. I am on the executive board of the OSINT Curious project, and I volunteer my time to a lot of OSINT related nonprofits. I am also, if you follow me at all, you already know this, I am a maritime OSINT enthusiast. That's what I focus on personally. I've also played in a lot of Trace Labs events, and my team, OSINT, won the we won the Trace Labs Black Badge at DEF CON last year. So now I will pass it on to Tracy.
Hey, that's me. Hi, I'm Tracy Z. Maleeff. I'm a security researcher with the Krebs Stamos Group. You may know me online as InfoSec Sherpa. And I'm going to be talking about, Tales from the Trenches, an OSINT story that I dealt with when I was a law firm librarian, which is my background. I've been in InfoSec for about 6 years now. And I did not realize that all the skills I had as a librarian had the cool name of OSINT. I just called it doing my job. So imagine my surprise when I pivoted into InfoSec and learned that I already had this skill set ready to go. So I'm excited to share this story with you. I'm going to talk more about storytelling techniques and sharing information that way. And together, Rae and I will give you a nice sandwich that you can take away of how to report and how to tell things in regards to OSINT.
I hope that's a Philadelphia sandwich.
It's a hoagie.
This one's you, Tracy.
Oh. Why don't you go first?
Okay. What we're going to be talking about today is why storytelling is important when we're reporting. We're going to go through these cases. We're going to talk about within these cases how we gathered information and how we created intelligence and how we then put it into a report for people to digest.
Got it. Yeah. What we want to do with this is explain either through report writing or storytelling or conveying verbally information how it's important not only to listen but to also speak with a purpose with your listeners in mind. Sometimes as OSINT researchers we need to explain our findings in a certain way. So we're going to kind of come at it at 2 different approaches so that you can walk away hopefully with a better idea and some more skills on how to not only ask questions, listen for questions, listen for answers, and just really be able to better communicate when it comes to our field of OSINT research. Okie doke. Let me start with my story here. So, since our theme is Once Upon a Crime, I'm going to share my OSINT research story that was, dramatic pause, a crime against fashion. Gasp, clutch your Jimmy Choos. First, I'm going to tell you the story of a research request. Then I'm going to dissect and explain parts of it. Third, I will recap it, basically our version of a crime scene investigation report, keeping with our theme. So, are you ready? Let's go. Dun dun. Law and Order music. We couldn't afford the real stuff, so just do it that way. A cargo ship filled with leather goods left a port in Europe and traveled to the US. When the ship arrived into the US port, it was discovered that the majority of the leather goods had significant water damage. I was given the date the ship left Europe and the date the ship arrived in the US. I was asked to determine the weather along the ship's route in order to correlate the weather occurrences to a legal jurisdiction for where the damage possibly occurred. Now, that sounds like a math problem, story problem from hell, doesn't it? I feel like being asked to find the middle name of the ship's captain would have been an easier task. So let's break this down. From the storyteller's perspective, you want to engage the listener. In journalism, they have a term called the inverted pyramid, where you place the most newsworthy items first, then other important details, and then other general or background information. Military folks may know this as a BLUF, BLUF, bottom line up front. Whatever you call it, you want to give the listener the who, what, where, when, why, how, even if you don't know of all those. It's kind of like an algebraic equation, right? We're solving for x, which in this story is mostly the why and the how, with some elements of when and where. If you structure your storytelling from the listener's point of view, that will help you better communicate and get information or an idea across. My first version covered the qualities for the top of the inverted pyramid. While I personally like the structure of the pyramid, I prefer to think of the other layers as overlays. You have your base story, then the next levels of overlays will get you into different and more details. So why is this even worth mentioning? Not every listener will want or need certain details. I have found it useful to use storytelling techniques in different ways to cater to different brain types. There's the controllers and manager brain type that desire the what and when. Then you have the innovators and influencers who like the why. The nurturers and harmonizers care for the who. The systemizers and analyzers want every piece of detail you have. If you look up Michael Cooper and brain types, you should find an Entrepreneur Magazine article from September 2014, which gets into more depth about that, and I'll share the link after the talk. All right, so here's my next layer. A cargo ship filled with designer leather goods left a port in Livorno, Italy, and traveled to Boston in the United States. When the ship arrived into port, it was discovered that the majority of the designer leather shoes had significant water damage. The ship left the port of Livorno on April 10th, 2006, and arrived into the port of Boston on April 20th, 2006. I was asked to determine the weather along the ship's route to identify any time it rained and correlated the rain location with a legal jurisdiction. This is what was asked of me, but with a little bit more detail. Can you hear the difference? Now, for my next layer, I'm going to really dig in and explain the questions I asked and the methods I used to give the attorney an answer. I've mentioned before in my empathy as a service to create a culture of security talk, hashtag shameless plug, sorry, that good listening skills are imperative for researchers. Here are the questions I remember asking when I tried to solve this. Now, keep in mind that this happened about 15 years ago. So some of you may be thinking, oh, this is easy. You just go to a certain maritime or meteorological pew-pew map and it's solved. Well, children, back in ye olden days of 2006 to 2007, my online resources were limited. So I asked the attorney for more information like, is there a route map of the course the ship took? What was the name of the ship? If I had the name of the ship, I could then figure out where it's registered, which might be useful. Also, I could do some news searches to see if the ship had ever been in the news before, any accidents or other issues. I also asked questions like, how much can I spend? As was commonplace with client work, that answer was usually nothing. As a law firm librarian, I had to keep track of my time in 6-minute increments, meaning I had to provide details of what I worked on every 6 minutes. While I don't recommend that level of detail, if you are doing research where billable hours are involved, it's helpful to keep some sort of track of your productivity. It was at this point in my troubleshooting that the attorney felt he had given me enough to go on and answered, "I don't know," to all of my questions. This is really important. OSINT researchers are not clairvoyant. Sure, we can be excellent problem solvers, but we do need something to go on. Remember, I worked at a law firm, so I reminded the attorney that the opposing counsel likely had all this information because the ship was their client. I offered to speak with them directly, fully knowing that he wouldn't like that, but I only did that as a way to motivate him to get the information I needed for his case. So the lesson in this is don't be afraid to speak up. Don't ask, don't get. You're not clairvoyant. Long story short, the opposing counsel did have lots of information that they were obligated to share, and then I had more to go on. Now, at this point, I'm going to pause to remind you that as OSINT researchers, it can be important to know the why and the how this information will be used, if you're even privy to that. In my case, I knew it was for a lawsuit, so I knew that I had to have accurate information and ironclad receipts. It was also important for me to understand that in this case, my law firm was representing the insurance company of the leather goods company who had their products damaged in transit. Understand what outcome is being expected of your research. In this case, it was subrogation. That's an insurance term that basically means the insurance company wanted to find someone else to be financially responsible so that they wouldn't have to be. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that was the outcome that was expected of my research. Now, please listen very carefully. By no means am I advocating for fudging results. I just want to be very clear in case someone's misunderstanding what I'm saying. I'm just saying I feel it's important that you understand how this information will be used. As I tell people doing regular InfoSec research, pretend that the board of your company is going to make a multi-million-dollar decision based on your InfoSec research findings. So just understand how, why this information is going to be used if you're able to get that information. Now, since many online resources weren't around or available to me at that time, 2007-ish, I had to get resourceful. For the ship's route, a single map helped me to see the other ports the ship visited before arriving in Boston. Now, this was a fact the original ask did not include. The way it was phrased to me was it went directly from Livorno to Boston, but it actually had other stops. Now, regarding the weather, now, at the time I was given this case to work on, it was in the past. So the website Weather Underground was extremely useful to get the weather from the past in all the different port cities. Now, as far as the weather across the ocean, I used my interpersonal and human networking skills and actually talked to people in the know. I'm an alumna of Penn State, and I also worked there as a librarian. So I was able to use a professional network to connect with a librarian in one of their specialty libraries. If you didn't know, Penn State is one of the US's top meteorology schools. Now, even if I didn't have a connection, I still would have called them anyway. So, this is why I encourage people to build diverse human networks and ask around. Do I know someone at X company or X institution? Do you mind introducing me, or do you have contact information you can give me? Don't be scared of using a phone or actually speaking to people to help solve research problems. Utilize all the resources available to you. Now, mostly because I really only have fuzzy memories of all this at this point in time. In summary, I was able to work with the Penn State meteorology librarian, who in turn gave me people to contact at US government agencies, one of them being NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. In the end, I was able to piece together a rough map of the ship's route with other port stops, with the weather in each port, and whatever mid ocean information I was able to cobble together. But me being insistent on getting the ship's route then opened up some other questions for the attorney to pursue, like Was the cargo moved when it went to different ports? Or were there other factors in those other stops that could have contributed to the damage? So, in closing, no, I don't know how this was all resolved, but I do have to say, my fellow law librarians did want to know if any shoes made the trip unscathed, and exactly how damaged were we talking? Were they still wearable? So, uh, dun dun. That is the wrap up of my crime scene investigation. This crime against fashion, and how you can use different ways to explain what you're doing and find information and sum it all together to the people so that you can maximize their understanding of what you are telling them.
Okay. I saw somebody in the chat say that they love anything maritime, so hopefully I don't disappoint. My case today is called One Fish, Two Fish. And Tracy mentioned the different types of people who would be consuming reports and kind of tailoring to them. I come from a background of graphic design, so a lot that I focus on is the structure of a report. Obviously, the words in it are important, but the way you structure a report is important too, with an appendix and clear headers and the bottom line up front, like Tracy said. So I think keeping that in mind when you're not only writing the report, but collecting the data is important. So this case, I was passed information on 2 tanker vessels that somebody said, hey, check these out, they're worth investigating. I was only given their names. They were fish related, hence the title of this case. So a lot of what I do in maritime is baselining an area and monitoring what happens there, because there's so much activity in the maritime sphere that you have to kind of get a baseline of the area before you can make any analysis. So I baselined this area, this specific area, and I monitored all the vessel movements through AIS satellite tracking in the area. I was able to see that these 2 vessels were clearly meeting in the ocean. One vessel was flagged Seychelles and one was flagged Chinese, but they had multiple identity changes through time, which is often an indication of an attempt to hide who they are. And that showed that my first fish here was actually Iranian in the past. So while I'm doing this investigation, I am pulling images. I'm saving down all these images of, what I'm finding. Their meeting, snap a picture, save it. Their tracks, snap a picture. The baseline before that activity happened, snap a picture, because all that's going to go in your report. So in these tracks, the meetings between these vessels lasted over an hour. So that is also an indication that they were doing something that took kind of a long time to do. It wasn't like they just waved to each other and kept going. So I was also able to, since they were together for a little bit, I was able to track them with satellite imagery, which is kind of hit or miss because you have to get the satellite in the right spot at the right time to get a picture of it. So I independently verified what I was seeing on AIS, which is not always trustworthy. So the tricky part about maritime when you're investigating or reporting or anything is a lot of it, unfortunately, is assumption and not necessarily verifiable. You see these tracks, but you can't prove that what you're seeing is reality because there's spoofing, there's GPS manipulation, things like that. So you usually have to independently verify them with a satellite image, or Dutch talked about, ship spotters or plane spotters. There's ship spotters too, people who just sit there and take pictures of vessels. So sometimes you can verify things that way. So when I was doing this investigation, I took all of the pictures from before the event, during the event, and after the event, as well as all the historical movements of the vessels. I noted that down. If they had been in this location before, that's of note because they might have been performing the same type of activity. Because a pattern of behavior is easier to report upon, and previous movements can kind of determine maybe what they're doing. Even if it's an assumption, you can say, we saw them do this 10 times, now they're doing it again, so probably they're doing the same thing. I did some sanctions research. I looked in, one of the vessels was sanctioned by the US, so there was a record of past illegal oil transfers with this vessel. So it's meeting up with another vessel. Sometimes it's a smaller vessel, sometimes it's a vessel that is flagged differently. If they're trying to get oil to North Korea or something where they're not supposed to go, they might transfer the oil to another vessel, and then that vessel goes where it is going. So that is something to note. So a struggle with reporting is making sure the consumer of this data is able to not only comprehend what I'm saying, but be engaged while they're reading it. Because as we all know, a lot of analysis is dry. If you're doing like network analysis, that could be very dry, especially if the consumer is not a tech focused person. Maybe it's a CEO or I don't know, somebody who's not networking focused. They won't understand what you're saying. So you have to kind of tailor it to them. So had I not been able to accurately convey these details of these sanctions and this past history of these vessels and the historic movements, it wouldn't have meant anything to them. They would have looked at it and said, oh, I see these ships meeting. I have no idea what that means. So using the structure of the report with the images, the appendix to store all that other filler information so you don't have 500 pages of report because nobody's going to read that, honestly. This information could be wrapped up and sent with final recommendations, which are a very important part of a report, is offering solutions or recommendations for what they should do now that they know this information. And this could lead to further sanctions or maybe sanctions of the companies that own these vessels or similar vessels. So the report itself is trying to lead to an action. You want to give them the information and then say, this is what you should do with this information. You want to make it compelling, inspire action, have to be accurate, check your spelling, try to avoid that jargon we talked about, and a lot of it has to be included, but you can tailor it in a way that is not so overwhelming. And always remember that your report is not just going to go to one person. They might take that and disseminate it to 100 people, and you don't know the tech knowledge of all those people. So you have to make sure that you keep it, in a level that other people can understand. And if you're presenting like a PowerPoint, you want to make sure all the details are in there. So it's not just a picture and they're like, oh, I don't know what this means. Or if it's a Word file, you want to have those appendix things. So that is my story. And now we're going to talk a little bit about binding it together. Tracy, if you want to.
Sure. Sorry, I was just answering a quick question. So actually, well, I'll start with the question and what I responded. So someone commented that they would have preferred some visualizations to some of the things that I mentioned. To which I responded, I will update my blog later and post it because the point of this is that I wanted people just to listen to what I had to say, because you can also get distracted a lot of times from other stuff. So there was a point to us doing that. But Ray and I really just want to emphasize the importance of being able to convey messages and explain what you do with an OSINT research. And keep in mind that you have different audiences. I know that in my talk I mentioned different brain types, but remember you also have different audiences uh, that you need to speak to in your hierarchy, in your chain. And a lot of the information might be really technical. So you also kind of have to check yourself there. Are you presenting a lot of jargon? Are you not explaining things? Are you using a lot of acronyms and not explaining what they are? So just because you know what something means, don't assume that everyone else does. So I feel like it's really important. You need to understand the audience for whom you're writing for or you're speaking for. Um, Another one is just also good note taking, either future notes to yourself. Again, as a librarian, I once heard the phrase repeated often that metadata is a future love note to yourself. So
I like that.
definitely, yeah, yeah. I know, I love that too. I obviously remembered it. Um, You also want to keep notes for yourself. Now, there's always things of like knowledge hoarding at organizations that people think that, if they don't share their knowledge, that they have some sort of, one up on you. But you also want to take, and that's not cool. So you want to take notes not only for others to be able to do good quality research as well, but you also want to take notes for yourself and instructions for yourself. So make sure you leave time when you're doing instructions, and don't, and I'm not dissing Hunchly. I'm just using this as an example. Don't just save a Hunchly search and think that you'll automatically remember everything that went into it. Take time to kind of, write these metadata love notes to yourself. Um, but I feel like storytelling is a skill that not enough people in infosec really know how to do or really understand. And we're talking about a lot of very complicated and honestly scary things, right? So, you need to engage folks, and you need to get them to understand and pick up on things that you want them to learn. And sometimes you might have to do that with a verbal 2x4 and be absolutely very clear and blatant. Um,
And
and
nobody's going to be perfect right out the gate.
yeah, yeah,
But
but and that's
it
a good
takes
thing.
practice.
And that exactly, and Ray's hitting on what I'm slow to get at here, is that the thank you, Ray. The benefit of this is that this is a skill you can learn and hone. And it has nothing to do with whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. That has nothing to do with it. This is a skill that you can learn and hone, of how to describe something in order to persuade or inform or get approval on. So this is why we wanted to tie this in, the reporting and the storytelling, as the sharing of information as it relates to OSINT research. Ray, do you have anything else you want to add?
I don't. I think that was perfectly said.
Okay.